itself. In these days, almost all teachers know that disability study is occupying foreground in various disciplines. In a way, it is actually a multidisciplinary phenomenon. So naturally, the world is not an abode only for the able-bodied, and it is also an abode for around 600 to 650 million differently abled people. So naturally, in this age of diversity, persons with disabilities also constitute an important constituting element of this entire universe. So that is the reason why I think and I thought it would be wise on my part to discuss on the conceptualizing approaches to the phenomenon of disability. So I think teacher participants do agree that since it is an online exercise, perhaps I think there are no technical hitches or technological hitches in our interface, online interface with one another. We may have to have discussion. If at all there are questions from the participants, they may raise their questions as ever and whenever you wish, because I am unable to read out the questions that you may likely to put to the chat box. I think this understanding is indispensably necessary. So that is the reason why I am requesting you, if at all you have any question, intermittently you may raise the question, ask the questions, so that I will be able to convince you by giving a question, by giving an answer. And I am also interested to know from you if at all there is any relevant answers for a particular question, or even you can also give your inputs regarding the topic if it flashes your mind. So let me bring to your kind notice that discourse on disability is highly varied and relevant. So as a part of the introduction, I think I should tell you that the entire world, it is consisting of more than 200 countries. But no country or no society is free from disability, isn't it? No country or no society is free from disability. Every person with all the abilities and capacities and capabilities, one can happily claim that he or she is sufficiently able-bodied, quite energetic, strong, happy and healthy enough to lead a normal life. But that normal life is not possible for so many people. The world is not meant only for the strong and fortunate, but it is also meant for those who are unable to lead a normal life on account of one or the other kind of difficulties, either inherited by them on account of genetic feature reasons, or the disability that may likely to have may be acquired as well. It may be congenital or it may be acquired. So naturally, against this particular background, we should look at the entire canvas of the conceptualization of the approaches to disability. So disability itself has become an important area of intense investigation and penetrative insight. People are thinking much about it in these days because awareness is being promoted everywhere thanks to the state, society, civil society interventions, and people are also becoming sufficiently conscious of the existence and identity of the persons with disabilities in and around us. So naturally, uh, dear teachers, disability is occupying an important place not only in uh, the day-to-day business of the mankind, but also in law, even in legal studies, in social studies, and even in natural and biological physical sciences, and even in genetic studies. This particular phenomenon of disability is being discussed. So I want to draw your attention to few important approaches that have helped in conceptualizing or constructing the notion of disability. How to understand this notion of disability? International classification of impairment, disability, and handicap. For the first time, this classification was made in 1980s. For your information, in the post-war period, that means after 1945, the disability discourse began to capture the attention of the people, not simply because it is a gray area, but also because it is the area which is very much tempting for intensive research and investigation in order to construct some important approaches. Let me draw your attention to as to what is meant by a handicap. Who is a handicap? In our day-to-day conversation, we try to characterize or describe and depict an individual who is suffering from one or the other forms of deformity by choosing this and that word. For example, a person who cannot see is called as a blind. A person who cannot properly walk is called as a mobility challenged or a cripple. A person who cannot speak and hear properly is called deaf and dumb. Similarly, a person who is unable to think properly and who cannot have what you call a disorder, one or the other type of the disorder, that means a disconnection between the mind and the words, the thought and the action, are called mentally challenged. So there are various kinds of what you call disabilities. And these disabilities have their own causes and they have their own process and consequences. And they have their relationship with their immediate persons in the family and in the society. On the basis of the nature of interaction between the individual who suffers from disability, and also on the basis of the interaction between the individual who suffers from disability and the role that he or she may likely to discharge in society, and the nature of relationship between the individual and society, there are various approaches have been developed. And the first and foremost approach that comes uppermost in the mind of an individual, if you look at a physically challenged person, a physically handicapped person, or a divang, that means an equivalent word for divang in English is a divine body. Divine body. Are you hearing me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Because I am unable to see you, but I want to see you only through my ears.
Yes, sir.
This abnormality on my part is actually due to my blindness. That is compelling me in order to talk to you so that I will be able to communicate with confidence. The very word handicapped is itself born out of a contempt. You must be knowing in 16th and 17th.
ನಾನು ಶೀಟ್ ಕೊಟ್ನಲ್ಲ ಕೊಡಿ ಸರ್ ಸಿಲೆಬಸ್ ಕಂಪ್ಲೀಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ ನಿಮ್ ಕೈ ಕೊಟ್ನಲ್ಲ
Please mute yourself. Please mute yourself.
ಒಂದ್ ಫೋಟೋ ಕಾಪಿ ತಗೊಳೋಣ ಅಂತ ಸೈನ್ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ
Yeah, please mute ಮಾಡಿ.
What's going there? What's going on there?
Somebody is admitted, sir.
Am I communicating to you properly? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Please, sir.
The very word handicapped in the initial stage was actually a derogatory term. Derogatory means that was an uncivilized word. WORD I'm talking. Why it was uncivilized? Because the person whose hands were capped and he was stood on the wayside, he was considered as a handicapped. That means the person whose organs were not functioning properly was compelled to beg on the street. The passers-by, that means those who used to go here and there, they were to put money into the cap that an individual was holding in his cap. So this was the actual derivation of the word handicapped. The person whose hands were capped for charity or for begging was considered as a handicapped. But fortunately, every expression has to undergo a substantial change over a period of time, because every civilization and every culture is dynamic by nature. So that the dynamic nature of the society, economy, polity coupled with the civilization and culture naturally brings about a large scale transformation even in our perception. So the persons who were considered as a handicapped were none other than they were treated as beggars. It was a stigma, and it is still considered to be a stigma in society. Disability is considered as a stigma. So they are fit only for charity. It is the perception. So charity was thought to be an important approach in formulating the various policies and programs, in evolving laws and implementing the laws, and even in delivering the judgments. For example, the various religions are still laying emphasis on the treatment, the fair treatment should be given to the persons with disabilities. It's almost like a philosophical approach. Charity is most important because it satisfies and gratifies the mind of an individual who wants to donate. But we should understand, charity is not a development. One disability scholar is there and activist is there by name Mahalingam from Sri Lanka. When he was participating in Disability Rehabilitation International, loudly pronounced, loudly said that charity is not our objective. You may quote this. Charity is not our objective. Charity is not necessary for us. Charity is not necessary for us because it is not part of the development. Unquote. Those who want to donate or those who want to give a penny will just give it and just go from that place. And subsequently, they disappear from that particular place. So that is the reason why charity is not a guarantor of the development. That's the reason why whatsoever be the philosophical tenets of the religions, whatsoever be the philosophical tenets of the various religious scriptures, they do not guarantee the right to development. Naturally, they promote begging in the society and they undermine the dignity of an individual. So charity was responsible for starting so many institutions. Even to this date, several non-governmental organizations are making use of the physically challenged people as a source of charity. That means they show the physically challenged people whom they house in their organizations for the purpose of rendering needed service. They collect a huge amount of donations. Donations is indispensably necessary. Without money. Hello.
Hombal sir, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಧ್ವನಿ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ನೋಡಿ. ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಆಗಿದೆ ನೋಡಿ ತಮ್ಮದೇನು. ಧ್ವನಿ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ.
ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ವಾ?
ಸರ್ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಸರ್.
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಏನೋ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಇದೆ.
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಸರ್, ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ನೋ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಸರ್. ನೋ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಸರ್.
ಆಡಿಬಲ್ ಹೇಳಿ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಸರಿ.
ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಸರ್, ನೀವು ಕ್ಯಾರಿ ಮಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಓಕೆ. ಓಕೆ. ಆಡಿಬಲ್ ನಾ? ಓಕೆ.
Audible.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, the charity itself is no more an important approach because, as you know, charity curbs the zeal of an individual. It dampens the competitive spirit of the individual. It never helps an individual to become an active member in the society. That's the reason why charity has always been and is being rejected by the disability activists like us, because, as you know, we want to contribute, we want to become an active contributor to the building up of the society, economy, and polity, and nation and humanity at large. So pity, sympathy, these words appear to be just ear-pleasing words. They do not have the strength to make an individual sufficiently able to give his best or her best selves for the benefit of the society. So that is the reason why charity as an important model of constructing the disability has been rejected outright by the discourse on disability. Even international organizations and international donor countries, howsoever rich, generous, and profusely interested in making use of the charity as an instrument to contribute huge amount of money for the developmental activities and the empowerment activities of the persons with disabilities, they are more interested on understanding the phenomenon of disability with some other important approaches. I think you have all understood the charity as an important approach to conceptualize disability. Am I right? Have you understood, sirs and madams?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir.
Shall we go?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any question on charity? Anybody has any question on charity as an approach to disability?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Are you enjoying or simply?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Nice,
Oh, nice, sir.
Enjoying.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Yes, sir.
informative. We are enjoying it. Please, sir.
You are enjoying?
Krishna, Hombal, sir.
Hello.
Sir, Mohandas, sir.
Mohandas sir, tell me. Do you have any
I'm enjoying
question?
your lecture, sir. Very good. Very nice.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Please go on.
Because in the post-lunch session, it is always difficult to catch hold of.
No, sir.
Your
It is
attention.
very, sir. It is very interesting. We are not getting any sleep, sir. Carry on,
Thank
sir.
you. No. No, it is a privilege to be at home and listen to the lectures.
That is true.
And at the same time, I am also delivering my lecture from my home. Yeah.
Very good, sir.
Fine. Fine. Almost all philanthropic institutions, ranging from local to global, have taken maximum advantage of the charity as an important approach to contribute to the overall development of the persons with disabilities according to their strength. Anyhow, as I said, charity falls short of the development. So that's the reason why people began to think about some other important approaches in constructing and conceptualizing the very notion of disability. What is that? What is the second most important approach? That is the biomedical approach. Important, and it should be underlined. Biomedical approach, what does it say? According to biomedical approach, three important words capture our attention. They are impairment, disability, and handicapped. Again, these three important words may look alike and may sound same, but there is a slightest difference among all these three words. Line of demarcation can be drawn while conceptualizing the three, because impairment is a biological condition. Impairment is a biological condition. It is influenced by some or one or the other causative factor in the society. So biomedical approach tries to look at the persons with disabilities from medical point of view. That means if you are unable to see, if you are blind, you are unable to see the objects around you. That means your ability is restricted by your disability. Our ability is restricted by our disability. We cannot perceive and formulate a perception on the basis of the knowledge we receive from a particular organ. That means a person physically, psychologically, even in terms of sensory organs, neurologically, cerebrally, the person who is disabled on these grounds may not be able to formulate or acquire knowledge and acquire the ability on account of the inbuilt weaknesses in these organs. So doctors are the gatekeepers. Doctors are the gatekeepers. They are the certifying authorities. They have the authority to certify the impairment, the degree of the impairment, nature of the impairment, extent of the impairment, and other things. But we should understand, biomedical perspective of the persons with disabilities will not be able to see the inherent strengths, feelings, possible apprehensions, and it cannot feel the actual concerns and anxieties that an individual might be having. So naturally, biomedical perspective appear to be more scientific. Body is everything for it. Physiological, psychological, anatomical structures and functions are the subject matter of biomedical perspective. So biomedical perspective looks at the disability and handicapped purely from these perspectives only. But its most fundamental weakness is that whatever the genetic information that you gather is insufficient to arrive at a conclusion. Diagnosis is not enough. Medically rehabilitation and other things are largely dependent upon the biomedical perspective itself. If the person is disabled, he must be rehabilitated in accordance with the needs, in accordance with the due duties to be discharged by him or her in the society. The blind man has to be helped. A stick has to be given in his hand. Don't know what kind of stick is given to us, but the stick that an individual uses at the time of mobility is most useful for ensuring the freedom of an individual. Diagnosis is equally important, but the accuracy of the diagnosis largely is doubted. It's largely doubted. You cannot assess the actual consequences of a particular disability in a proper way. For example, a normal person can get a certificate from a doctor stating that he is a person with low vision. A person with low vision has the tendency to get a medical certificate from the doctor stating that he is a partially blind person. A partially blind person can approach a doctor and tell him that he can get a certificate that he is totally blind. Sight or ophthalmometer is not sufficiently efficient in judging the actual the blindness of an individual. Similarly, you do see that most of the doctors who depend upon the diagnosis or the medical knowledge that they possess itself is quite often fraught with suspicion. This suspicion is because of the human intervention That means you cannot simply judge that blind is not intelligent. You cannot simply say that deaf and dumb are unfit to work. You cannot say simply on grounds of the mobility challenged condition of an individual that he doesn't have the capacity to achieve maximum things. That means man has the capacity to triumph forward one's own deformities and disability. And a physical, psychophysical body of an individual might be suffering from one or the other form of the deformity or disability, but not the personality. So medical perspective, biomedical perspective itself is insufficient in order to understand in order to conceptualize and understand the disability for this reason. Its lack of precision, its inability to understand the abilities that are invisible to the naked eyes of the doctor. All these are a most important thing. Then genetic information is just a mountain of information. It will help you only to understand the disability, but not properly conceptualize it. So biomedical perspective is also inadequate. That's the reason why the third most important approach has been evolved, that is called functionalist limitation approach. Functionalist limitation approach. What is this approach? This approach is also interesting. Each and every organ of us has a particular function. Since you have the eyes, you will be able to see the beauty. You can have the aesthetic pleasure. Since you have the ears, you will be able to hear. You will enjoy the fluty voice. You will definitely enjoy the music. Since you have the nose, you will be able to smell the fragrance of the flower. Not only fragrance of the flower, but also the fragrance of the Javani. It happens quite naturally for each and every one of us. Since we have the ability to touch and feel, we can touch and feel and understand the structures ranging from plants to whatever the objects that we do come across, we will be able to understand the structure and imagine about it. And it's what you call, we can see the structure, we can have an orientation of the structure. So functional limitation approach clearly states that impairment of an individual is the result of one or the other factor. For example, is there anybody who is suffering from diabetes? Diabetes brings blindness to the eyes of an individual. Glaucoma is developed. Glaucoma is developed. That impairment is adding abnormality to the normal functioning of the individual. Abnormality is added to the individual. That abnormality as a consequence of the impairment is actually due to various factors that are there within the individual or outside the individual. So functional limitation approach tries to look at the interaction between the person with disability and also the roles that he or she is supposed to play in the society. Society itself is a big machine. Society itself is a big machine. It expects each and every one of its cogs has to perform particular functions in accordance with its noble or ignoble objectives and desires. So likewise, functional limitation clearly indicates that persons with disabilities are unable to function because of their limitations of the organs. It is slightly a modified version of the biomedical perspective of the disability. It is slightly a modified version of the biomedical perspective of the disability. That means functional limitation approach is somewhat similar to biomedical approach, and in a way it appears to be the reverberation of the biomedical perspective or biomedical approach of the disability. But however, instead of calling a sightless person as a blind, it tries to describe that he cannot see, she cannot see, she cannot hear, he cannot hear, like this. So, but this functional limitation can be overcome by dint of an individual's enthusiasm, and he can also acquire, or she can acquire, the functional abilities. These functional abilities can be acquired by an individual. I was unable to make use of the assistive technology few years ago, but after understanding the significance of the assistive technology or the computer technology, communication technology, now I am able to access you all. So functional limitation approach is also ruled out, and subsequently it has also its own limitations like this. That is the reason why people began to look at the entire phenomenon of disability from yet another perspective. Functional limitation, have you understood completely?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
please.
Yes, sir.
That means our sensory organs, the physical limbs and organs that we have, they have their own limitations. They cannot produce the maximum output. They cannot receive the inputs also. You may be remembering input-output analysis of the David Easton in political science, like that. So similarly, the biological approach that is called functional limitation approach is very much crucial for us for this particular purpose. That is, the better the capacity of an individual's organ, better it will be able to receive the inputs and give the output. This is as simple as that. If your eyes are sufficiently sharp, you will be able to see the object accurately. If your nose is sufficiently sharp, you will be able to grasp the smells accurately. Flavors and aromas can well be grasped accurately, provided you have a sharp nose. If you have a sharp ears, you will be able to hear the sound coming from beyond the walls. Likewise, organs have the capacity, and the limitations of the organs naturally limit the capacity of an individual, is the argument of the functional limitation approach. But this restrictive, what you call physically, psychologically, sensorily, cerebrally, neurologically, restrictive notion of disability did not convince the persons with disabilities. That is the reason why there was a scholar by name Oliver Michael. Please underline the name Oliver Michael. Oliver Michael, he began to look at what you call the entire phenomenon of disability from sociological perspective. Sociological perspective. He tries to define disability in terms of the relationship between the individual and the society again. What is this? It is called social model of disability, social approach to disability. When you want to conceptualize the disability, you cannot simply confine the disability to the individual's body and mind. It is not simply an impairment. It is not simply an impairment. It always feels in social model of disability, individual may be suffering from disability, but consequences are more on the individual. But simply, disability is not individualistic. It is societal as well. As you see, so I am. It's a matter of perception. Society is our mother. Society is our mother in all practical terms. If you look at the society, you'll be able to realize that society is the cradle of not only institutions and associations and also state, but also that of the individuals. Persons with disabilities are in society. They are not solitary beings. They are not animals, as caricatured by the Thomas Hobbes in State of Nature, how the individuals were. As Aristotle said, persons with disabilities are also social animals and political animals in the strict sense of the term.
Alert, Dr. Samir Pasha RCHR057 has lowered hand.
At the same time, we should understand one significant fact here, that social construction of the persons with disabilities is equally important. Society has the responsibility to look after the persons with disabilities. Social attitudes, social practices, prevalent customs towards these people decide the fate of these people. So to live in community, to live in society is ultimately the inevitable part of the life of an individual. So naturally, persons with disabilities have to be looked at as an inevitable part of the society, and their mainstreaming, their inclusion is a need. Mainstreaming itself is not properly defined. What do you mean by mainstreaming, sirs and madams? How do you look at the mainstreaming? What is your understanding of the mainstreaming?
Considering them as the part of the main society rather than excluding them from the society.
May I know your name, sir?
Dr. Sunil Bagde from Karnataka State Law University, Hombal, sir.
Very nice.
Thank you, sir.
Bagde sir's understanding is exactly what I wanted to say. We have the tendency to give the hands, not the take hands. We have to take the hands when there is a competition between the normals, so-called able-bodied, and also the differently abled. Naturally, differently abled are left behind in a running competition. One may raise a question. In competition, can an able-bodied be able to carry the differently abled person on his shoulder and run? Competition is competition. But the visibility and invisibility of the competition always differs. In social model of conceptualizing the disability, you should look that the physical, psychological, mental, neurological, or any kind of disability may be personal to an individual. But thanks to the social intervention, this kind of disabilities effects can be minimized to a greater extent. A helping hand will definitely help in minimizing and mitigating the disaster that an individual acquires on account of disability in the life. The positive cooperation of the able-bodied is sufficient to bring about a large-scale change in the life of an individual. So Oliver Michael wanted to give this message only. It is the fault of the society to compound a person with disabilities, to corner the person with disabilities and push him to the corner. It is the responsibility of the society to take persons with disabilities along with them. Isolation is not an answer. Isolation is not an answer. You cannot insulate. Compartmentalization of the persons with disabilities is actually a ruthless endeavor. Custodial cares, you can see, they have got their own limitations. Segregation is not an answer. Inclusivity, effective participation are crucial components of ensuring sociability of an individual. So social model of disability clearly indicates that it is the responsibility of the society and state and other organs that we do find institutions, social institutions, have the responsibility to do these things. So society has to remove the barriers. Removal of barriers is most important. Transformation of the mind of an individual towards persons with disabilities is most essential in order to make him or her most resourceful individual fit enough to contribute a lot for building up of the society. So humanitarian attitude is crucial in this respect. But at the same time, society cannot afford to be negligent towards this. But how far this social model of disability is useful? Social model of disability may not be fraught with dangers, but it is not insulated from charity as well. Even the development has to be done in accordance with the social development has to be done in accordance with the social model. You cannot afford to ignore persons with disabilities because they are part of the family. They have to live in community. They have to live in peer group. They have to live in institutions and associations built up by the human beings thanks to their collective endeavor. So naturally, we do see that social model of disability is very much clear enough in giving a message that mainstreaming simply does not mean asking them to come to the society, but instead of that, you have to go to them. Because if you do not go to them, they will not be able to understand the wide gulf that exists between persons with disabilities and the society dominated by the able-bodied. So social model seeks integration. It seeks social integration. It is against segregation, and it requires that society should shoulder much more social responsibility in what you call in bringing about the large-scale transformation, in bringing about a change. In addition to this, we have one more important approach. That approach is also called what you call the human rights approach. This particular approach is very much crucial for understanding the notion of disability. To respect the inherent dignity of the individual, to respect the autonomous status of an individual, to enable an individual to exercise his freedom of choices, and to enable him to lead an independent life, what is most important is the rights. Biomedical charity model was against the dignity of the individual. Biomedical model looked at the pejorative aspect of the disability. The functionalist model of disability is also restrictive. Social model has sought to expand the horizon of our vision of disability. And the human rights model, it appears to be the most modified version of the social model of disability. So human rights model is a crucial model, and this model is born out of the constant effort on part of the disability movement throughout the world. The surging consciousness, we should understand that consciousness should surge a lot. The surging consciousness, constant assertiveness, and progressive thinking and aggressive action contributed a lot for the evolution of the human rights model for the benefit of the persons with disabilities. Because all these models were fraught with inadequacies, and human rights model is supposed to be the most important model because of its change, because of the change it brought in the perception, in the outlook of the people. It creates an acceptability, sense of acceptability. The birth of a normal child is always celebrated with glory. I am emphasizing this. The birth of a normal child is celebrated with glory. Can the birth of a disabled child is celebrated with that glory? Tears gush out of your eyes. They flow down the cheek. Create so many tensions in the mind. Even the presence of a persons with disabilities in the family itself is treated to be a big burden. Howsoever you are an earning member in the society, whatsoever may be your position in the society, still you are treated as a burden in the minds of your siblings. Because everything has to be given into the hands. Everything has to be told with the tongue. Everything has to be explained. You will not be able to see the things properly. Blindness itself is a limitation to see. A faded wall, a faded paint, a dirty water, spilt milk, all wanted to be explained properly. A rotten fruit can be identified with the help of your own sharp nose. But still, what happens? Human rights model clearly states that rights of an individual have to be recognized, and these rights are crucial components. They are also as normals, normal human beings. So disability is not an anathema here. Removal of restrictions is the need of the hour. You cannot look at them with restrictive minds. Restrictions are not an important component here. You have to liberate the persons with disabilities from the chain of what you call so many obstacles. So removal of barriers is most important. See, United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities signed, brought into stay on 13th December 2006 by the United Nations General Assembly. It seeks to define disability rather broadly. Whenever there is a barrier between the person with disability and the society environment, that barrier itself is disability. The removal of that barrier between the interaction of an individual and society is most important here. So that is the reason why disability has become an evolving concept. It is not an end in itself. So human rights, as far as they are applicable for the normal human bodies, able bodies, similarly, these rights are also applicable to the persons with disabilities as well. So that's the reason why in 21st century, the greatest achievement of the mankind or the United Nations or global governing arrangements is that it has adopted United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which seeks to remove the discrimination from the face of this earth. Quote unquote, don't know whether it is possible or not, but still persons with disabilities are able to raise their heads and stand with dignity and say that nothing about us without us. That sense of inclusion is being asserted greatly. That sense of inclusion is the need of the hour. So sensitization is most important, and so social, economic, political, cultural, and all forms of the rights that are there, they have to be accessible even to the persons with disabilities in accordance with their needs. This is called need-based approach. So now disability is not an individualistic concept, it is a social concept. That means society has to pay attention to the persons with disabilities. And it is a human rights approach and human rights concern because they are also like human beings. They are also like normal human beings entitled to all kinds of the human rights. But these human rights try to promote sense of what you call oneness, a sense of inclusion and inclusivity, and a sense of recognition. An identity has to be created even for them, because then and then only they will be able to contribute a lot for making the global civilization and global culture. This is the reason why in World Program of Action in 1984, in United Nations General Assembly, right to preferential differential treatment, right to their right to live as they are, and their right to recognition have been recognized as the most crucial parts or most crucial ingredients of making their lives happy and worth living. Worth of an individual not simply lies in the limbs and organs, but the ability and capability that an individual acquires by virtue of his hard work. Honesty matters a lot. I think all these are the most important approaches in understanding the person with disabilities. That is the reason why once upon a time, a person with disability was called a handicapped. Subsequently, change took place. Impaired individual, a disabled individual, differently abled. Now, thanks to human rights, they are able to become definitely abled, sufficiently capable to compete with normals in order to give their best selves for the betterment of the whole mankind. I think all these are the important approaches which you, I think, have understood very neatly. If at all you have any question, you can directly tell your name and